Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us again. Mike Berger, partner with LMB Law Group. This is our Facebook group on dental practice ownership and some of the legal considerations behind that. Today, I wanted to talk with you about the top three things that I typically see negotiated as far as terms in a dental acquisition. We've done a couple of videos now on sort of a high level recap of what a dental acquisition looks like, on what a letter of intent generally looks like. And in my practice, we're typically working on probably about, I would say, 12 to 15 dental acquisitions a year as a practice group. And in those, probably these are the three most common points of negotiation we go through, whether we're representing a seller, whether we're representing a buyer. I really tried to think back and boil it down to what I see most often. The acronym I have for it is PAT, P-A-T, right? These are the three top negotiated terms, the PAT, if you will: price, assets, and transition. So that's what I've boiled it down to. Let's get the obvious elephant in the room out of the way first and talk about price. This is, of course, the purchase price of the practice, or the selling price if you're the selling doctor. Of course, this is a transaction. It's where we are buying something, we're selling something, there is value exchanged. From the legal standpoint, we look to exchange consideration. This is an element in any contract so that we have a binding of terms. But to the buyer, to the seller, it's really more of a value proposition, right? It's what is being paid in exchange for what is being received. And I think to the selling doctor, it's often coupled with an emotion or a feeling of, I've built this practice over time. I want to see that my patients are taken care of. I believe I've put blood, sweat, and tears into this thing, and that's a justifiable position, certainly understandable. And so the seller wants to receive value. The buyer is looking to acquire a business, a practice that is going to help them build a career and move forward. And so for the buyer, it's really about return on investment, right? What are we going to put into this as far as a dollar amount? And then what are we going to get out of it in the long term? And so those factors come into play, as well as just the nuts and bolts of getting with your finance team, your CPA, your banker, your legal team, to really figure out what is the value given your market, given the patient base, given the financials of the practice, and is it going to be viable to cash flow going forward? Meaning a buyer is going to acquire this, they're going to pay value, usually through some form of lending product. They're going to have to cash flow overhead of the practice as well as debt service to repay those obligations and still make a living out of the practice. So it is important to consider all of those things. And this is a term that gets negotiated into a letter of intent typically, but then there can be changes throughout the course of a deal based on change of events or discovery of new information through due diligence or something of that nature. So purchase price, number one, that's the P. For the A in PAT, I mentioned assets. And when I think about assets, I think about really, I guess, two general buckets. Number one, what are the assets being acquired? Generally, we're seeing things like inventory, equipment, accounts receivable sometimes, and we'll get to that in its own sort of discussion. I might have a whole separate video on accounts receivable now that I'm thinking about it, but really, what are the assets being conveyed? What are the tangible assets, those things like inventory, equipment, and so forth? And what are the intangible assets, things like goodwill, the value of the reputation of the selling doctor or the selling practice to the buying doctor, the website, the brand, what are those things being conveyed, the phone number? All those things are sort of what are the assets. And then a second bucket to consider when we're talking about the A and PAT, again, our top three things negotiated in a dental deal, is the asset allocation, or a better way to say it, purchase price allocation. How do we divide up and apply the portions of the purchase price to certain assets in the deal? In other words, if we're going to pay $1 million for a dental practice, how much money of that goes towards equipment, inventory, accounts? How much of that is attributable to goodwill? And this is something that's really important to get, again, with your legal team, with your finance team, your CPA, your banker, to try to figure those points out to be negotiated into the final deal. Sometimes that asset allocation is in the letter of intent. Other times it's to be determined. And quite often it's a negotiation point that really carries through the deal and into the later stages of transactional document drafting and so forth. But again, trying to figure out really what are the assets that are coming along with this practice? Are there any excluded assets? Is there anything that the selling practice or the selling doctor wants to exclude from sale, a particular piece of equipment? One of the most common are just certain personal effects of the dentist, diplomas and things of that nature. So what are the assets? And then figuring out, again, what is that purchase price allocation attributable to those assets that are coming along. Finally, for the T in our PAT acronym, for those top 3 items that we see negotiated regularly in dental deals, T I have standing for transition. And transition encompasses a number of things in my mind. Number one, it is how the practice is going to be transitioned. Are we going to have a letter that goes out to our patients? Are we going to have an email that goes out to our patients? What about the mechanics of the practice, the passwords, logins, staff training, and so forth? How do we effectively pass that baton from the selling doctor to the buying doctor to have a smooth and seamless transition? Another element of transition is really what is going to be the role of the selling doctor or selling practice moving forward in our dental transition. Will they be staying on for some period of time? Will it be simple administrative transitional assistance? Or will there be a clinical element here where the selling dentist is going to be providing care to patients rolling forward in some capacity, whether it's a 1099 independent contractor capacity for the new practice or a full-time W-2 type of employment. And those things need to be considered. And then along with that, in the transition space and the employment space, it's the restrictive covenants, right? There are certain restrictions that are typically placed on the seller, the selling practice, the selling doctors, to make sure that the goodwill that is being transitioned and sold to the buyer is going to remain intact. And so things there are affectionately referred to as non-competes, non-solicits, confidentiality, certain restrictive covenants that get put into place, again, to be negotiated as far as length and duration, geographic scope, breadth of services that can or cannot be provided for whatever period of time and within whatever geographic scope. All of those elements really need to be worked through, negotiated, and decided upon as a part and parcel of that final transactional document. So that's it. That's our top 3 items that we see negotiated in dental transactions. I hope you found this informative. Please join us again next time. If you have any questions and follow-up, leave us a comment in the description. We'll try to address it in a future video. Until then, stay safe, and we'll talk with you again soon.